Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. Looks like we've got a great crowd today, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, some housekeeping. Check out the Ask a Question tab, because today's discussion about enabling Agile DevOps teams with secure services, mouthful of a title, is going to be interactive. So as our presenters are discussing the different topics and the questions that I'll serve them up, I want to hear from you guys too. Ask your questions, and I'll go ahead and interject those into the conversation so that we can get a real good dialogue going for everyone and get your questions answered. So with that, what we will do, one more thing. If we don't get to the questions during the presentation, we'll go ahead and reserve some time at the end, try to do that. And with any questions we're not able to answer, we'll follow up with you after the presentation. So real quick, I just wanted to introduce Beyond20. Beyond20 is your team that has expertise in ITIL assessment, ITSM, costing, consulting, as well as strategic planning with ITSM implementations, along with general IT best practices. Large partner community in which OpsRamp is a part of, and we're proud to be partnering with this presentation today to bring you some ideas. So real quick introduction of OpsRamp. OpsRamp is the unified IT operations management platform for the hybrid enterprise, from discovery and monitoring all the way across the infrastructure, no matter on-prem or in third-party cloud, to centralize your event and incident management for greater efficiency and transparency, including remediation and automation with AIOps integrated throughout, all within a single SaaS-based platform with role-based access and dashboards to help your IT ops teams maintain the performance of your services with greater precision and efficiency. And obviously, we want to introduce Beyond20 and OpsRamp into this conversation early because we want to give you a framework of our expertise as a partnering team to market to help you solve for your IT operations challenges and accomplish your objectives. So today what we're going to do is, as I said, going to be a real interactive conversation with our two veteran experts within the technology and operations industry, Mark Hilliard and Jeff Coleman. Gentlemen, can you give us a quick introduction of yourselves and your background? Why don't we start with you, Mark?
Absolutely, yeah. My name is Mark Hilliard with Beyond20. I'm a senior advisor. I've been in the technology space for about 24 years now. I have worked pretty much my way up from just doing manual inventories of IT assets up through managing world-class enterprise data centers. I am a very long-standing operations guy, and I've had the pleasure of working with the OpsRamp team over the last year plus as a partner, and I'm really excited about the partnership and the tool.
And my name is Jeff Coleman. Hello. I'm a solution strategist here at OpsRamp. Like Mark, a veteran in this industry, just a little bit longer. I think I started my journey almost 30 years ago. I've actually worked for a number of software vendors in the IT service management, IT asset management, and IT operations management space for the last 20 years. And then the 10 years leading up to that, I actually worked for a number of large enterprise organizations. Started off on the help desk answering calls, worked my way up to actually managing one of the largest data centers in Chicago for the largest Dutch bank. So looking forward to our conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jeff. And my name is David Roth. I'll be the moderator for the discussion today, and I lead solutions marketing with the OpsRamp team. So the topic of today's webinar, enabling developers with secure services. I mean, key terms there, developers or DevOps and secure services. And what we want to do with today's discussion is tie those pieces together with the operations piece. So development, security, governance, along with the operations team, and how operations help support those developers with those secure services. And when talking about enabling developers, what we're really doing is enabling developers to enable the business, to support those business objectives, to rapidly innovate, to deliver those services, those applications to those business units. And it comes in cooperation with the development team, the operations team, and those business units to determine those objectives and set those dependencies in place. So that requiring quite a bit of collaboration. And oftentimes there's challenges in doing so in terms of efficiency challenges. Trying to set up the right environment in the right time for that application to deliver the right performance. And with that, the operations team often has to use multiple tools and is overloaded with those tools, and challenges with integrating the data across monitoring and management tools to keep up the performance of those applications and the systems that they rely on. And in turn, security and governance of compliance is of utmost concern across that environment. And in order to do all that, you need to know what's inside your environment. So that discovery and optimizing those resources that you have today is of utmost concern, especially today at a time when most companies are looking to drive efficiency and cost savings, optimizing existing resources. So what we want to do is, I just want to start out with the first question of the challenges of creating a DevOps organization. If you could kind of give us your introduction of or your definition of DevOps, since it could take on multiple realms.
Sure, absolutely. So I always kind of look at things from a challenge perspective first. Again, being an old ops guy, I think that's probably just in my nature. But DevOps at its core is really about increasing the flow of productive and meaningful, valuable products and services from development to an operational state. And while the development side of that has been pretty well documented and pretty successful in most organizations, one of the biggest challenges, and I challenge you to go ahead and do a search for this, but is where's the ops in DevOps? We often leave ops behind, and I think that has been more true in recent years than maybe even when we started in sort of down the Agile and DevOps road almost a decade ago now. For an operations team to really truly be part of the DevOps pipeline, they need to be included from the beginning. The collaboration piece has to be there, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face, because I have yet to run into an organization that is super excited about spending more money on operational resources. And so your ops folks are generally dealt, as David said, with multiple tools that they are trying to leverage in old ways to handle new ways of working. And so there's a big skills gap there for ops people. And this is one of the things that I think we've started to recognize as a real detriment to the DevOps methodology, and something that really, in order to fully realize the value of DevOps, we need to close that gap.
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. When we look at kind of what's happened in IT in the past, let's say 10 to 20 years. It's really become fragmented or siloed, right? You've got DevOps, you've got IT ops, you've got cloud ops, you've got your service management group. And, I'd certainly argue that, not only the creation of DevOps collaboration is key, right? But also just in supporting the agile and rapid releases that are coming out of the dev org, so that when something, let's say, breaks, we're not all shooting in different directions, right? We're not passing ships. We can all collaborate and work together to very rapidly restore service without leaning too heavy on any of those organizations. Yeah,
definitely. I think one of the things that I've come to believe is, DevOps has become almost a silo unto itself in a lot of organizations. Where we were trying to get rid of silos, we managed to create a whole brand new one. Where we create a DevOps team, and then nobody talks to them, and they don't talk to anybody either, and so you're kind of losing out on one of the major tenets of the concept, by not allowing that to allow the flow to really cross those lines and sort of to quote a buzz term in the industry to shift things left closer to the customer.
Yeah, so with trying to shift things closer to the customer and trying to improve the performance for the customer by bringing operations closer to the development team, what you're saying is that we're creating, these oftentimes can create an additional silo that could cause additional challenges. So I guess with that, why create this DevOps team? Why enable a rapidly moving agile organization?
So, I think really one of the biggest value adds for DevOps, and again, I'm from an operations standpoint, so believe me, the first time I heard the term, it just made me cringe. This idea that developers could deploy directly to production, and there was automation, and where do I come in as a sysadmin? But the reality is that as you kind of collaborate, one of the biggest problems that developers have had for a very long time is that they were building in an environment that nobody else used. They weren't building stuff in environments that were actually production. And again, it made me cringe to think that was a better way of doing things. But the reality is that when we introduce bugs into a production environment, usually it's because we didn't have an environment that mimicked that well enough to find the bugs as we went along. And excuse me, one of the sort of the second way, the three ways of DevOps, but the second major concept of DevOps is this idea of continuous feedback loops. So your operators, the people on the ops end of things, have a much bigger stake in getting back to development, and development has a greater amount of accountability for what they build because they're building it pretty much directly to production. There's no longer this huge pipeline of 15 QA teams looking at every possible scenario. Developers are now given this opportunity to very rapidly move things out there and get instant feedback. It's some people call it agile on steroids because even rather than these short little sprints, we have people doing multiple releases in a day, and that gives the opportunity to make those small incremental changes and improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as we continue to move more towards this agile organizational culture, this aligns really well with kind of the bigger picture digital transformation, right? With organizations kind of reclassifying themselves as digital entities, delivering digital services to their customers, even if you and I don't necessarily think of them in that manner, right? And so, to your point, getting these improvements, getting these fixes out to the customer base in such a quick fashion, I think is huge, right?
Absolutely, in terms of just driving the business forward and being able to compete stronger. Can we get into a little bit more detail about the IT operations piece? As technology advances so much more rapidly at an expounding rate, and IT ops teams having fewer and fewer tools to manage those, the vast amount of technologies, what are the challenges brought about by enabling these agile teams from a pure IT ops standpoint?
Yeah, were you going to? There we go. Awesome. Yeah. So comment as obviously as we move towards this more rapid innovation, right? Whether it's release cycle or even just the back end infrastructure required for these modern hybrid workloads, hyper-converged infrastructure, so on and so forth. The need to have that visibility, to have that observability, to have things not slip through the cracks, right? I think is certainly there. And I think you've brought this up a couple times, David, which is, hey, look, from an operations side of things, tool sprawl's been a real challenge. It certainly has over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, because the traditional legacy on-prem IT operations platforms really kind of failed to keep up with the innovation that we were implementing in enterprise organizations, right? Things like containers and microservices and virtual and cloud resources and workloads. And so what that really forced a lot of these organizations to do is say, all right, well, I've got to complement my traditional on-prem, discovery and monitoring platform with several different point tools to gain that visibility, right? And so then where do we end up with that? Well, we end up with something going wrong, and now we're all tabbing between 7 different consoles to try to figure out root cause and then restore service, right? I'd also argue that, when we think even 10 years ago, when a development group needed a new server, we might have told them, look, that is a 2 or 3 week lead time, because we have to order the hardware, we got to rack it up, we got to provision it, we got to do all these things. Obviously virtualization has shortened that to a matter of minutes, and then of course as we move into microservices and containers, that's now shortened into just almost instantaneous with non-persistent resources that support these various elements of applications and workloads. So, those are huge challenges, the things around blind spots, supportability, keeping up with the pace of these various releases that are being released in an agile nature within the organization. And, Mark and I have talked about this before, where since we end up with DevOps kind of being their own siloed team, the skill set for ITOps, for cloud ops, seems to be changing pretty rapidly, where now I need folks with development chops in the operational side of things, because they're constantly keeping up with, hey, I've got to make a quick code change to fix this. So plenty of challenges as we go down this path, David.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that the ops skills gap is a very real thing, and in addition to that, we're also asking. Not only are we asking, our operations teams to do more in that regard, we're also feeding. Now we talk about big data as if it were just something that we've always had, but the reality is that the sheer quantity of data coming out of modern hybrid systems, containers that may last for, seconds, even just monitoring that with a lot of the traditional tools that we've tried to modify and adapt over the years is becoming demonstrably impossible for operations to do effectively. I cannot as a NOC, if I'm a NOC analyst, I can't possibly manually monitor a microservice that exists for 8 seconds in one virtual container in a cloud service somewhere. It's just not possible to do that with any kind of accuracy, and then you lose so much of the correlation that the promise of monitoring is supposed to bring us, right? Why did that particular microservice fail? The root cause analysis that that we all sort of strive to get to as as operational and development teams. It's one of those things that today we just, with the traditional tools in place, it's really, really, really difficult to do that effectively at all.
It is,
yeah.
And not to leave the service management folks out of the conversation, but when we all think back to the old days when we had an application consisted of a web server, a database server, and an app server, that aligned really nicely with the CMDB, right? And you can certainly lean on that to understand impact and relationships. I'd argue that some of these newer and newest of technologies, I think that on the ITSM side of the house, people are still scratching their heads saying, well, if this is the place I'm going to understand impact and start my triage and troubleshooting, how can we even present or represent these microservices, these very short snapshots in time?
Yeah. And as those environments grow, trying to scale the monitoring and management of those new technologies that organizations may not be as familiar with becomes even more challenging. So what I'm hearing from you guys is, we all know it's obviously worth it to try and overcome the challenges that you've mentioned in order to enable the business to compete stronger, right? But there's some definite challenges to address along the way. You mentioned blind spots and keeping up with the new technologies. I think it was you, Jeff, and that kind of plays well into the security discussion. Can you talk to me a little bit about your perspective in terms of IT operations team's role in ensuring adequate governance and compliance and and security compliance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, again, as long as IT has been around, understanding what we have, I think, is the foundation of any of these practices, certainly including the security elements, right? But as we go beyond that, you know, what do modern organizations expect from IT operations? You know, I think that's a combination of disciplines here, right? I mean, of course, understanding what we have regardless of where it exists, right? So whether it's an on-prem resource, a private cloud resource, a public cloud resource, whether it's network, storage, compute, virtual containers, voice, applications, databases. I mean, there's all these things that we've got to keep tabs on just to understand, so that, of course, the SecOps teams and those groups can certainly do their own jobs. Ideally, we want to drive to the point that, hey, look, not only do we understand what we have, but we also understand how those things are all connected to each other. And because once we have the what do we have and how is it connected, the key is to then tie those resources to the various applications and business services that exist within the organization. Because let's be honest, we live in a time now where if I get an alert with a server name or a resource name, it probably doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to me, right? But by understanding how it's connected and how it supports those business applications and services, now I can get alerting or have tickets opened and routed in either a classic ITSM tool or a dev tool like a Jira or Serena with the business context attached, right? That's huge. Obviously, the observability of these resources, again, regardless of where they sit or what they are, is extremely important, monitoring those types of things. And monitoring them with, to Mark's point, let's use big data, right? Let's use algorithms and AI and machine learning to kind of break free of the traditional approach of, all right, well, if a server hits 90% CPU, I'm going to get an alert, right? That doesn't really tell me the full picture anymore, the way that it may be used to. And then if something does break, right, if we're moving towards Agile to push out updates and releases and new functionality within the organization, well, in the event something breaks, let's use the system to immediately react and auto-heal those types of things, right? As opposed to, again, all of a sudden we break out of the Agile approach and say, all right, well, let's pull up a change management meeting and talk about this. That's kind of the old or the older approach when it comes to dealing with certain standard types of outages, right? How can we bring that auto-healing? And then, of course, finally, from a governance standpoint, I mean, not only keeping track of everything that the machines have done along the way in an automated fashion, but certainly if a technician is going to remote in and do something or execute certain scripts or push certain software, we want that full audit trail along, you know, with that resource, because as many of us know, you know, the human element, we're the biggest offenders. We're the number one reason that there are continued outages in our environments, right? So if we have that audit trail so we can go back, figure out what went wrong, and then immediately restore that service, you know, that's all going to play into a much more modern IT operations approach that, of course, benefits, among other organizations, the DevOps team.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, that auditability and honestly, the consistency of, you know, of things like, you know, AIOps and machine learning, that, you know, that plays directly into governance, right? If I can say that we consistently solve issues in X manner, and that is something that can be traced to every time that issue occurs, this is, you know, that type of issue occurs, this is how it's handled, and it's always handled the same way, and it doesn't matter if I'm in, you know, if I'm the guy who's watching the monitor or, you know, or you know, Dave is watching, it doesn't matter who's watching, right? If it's going to be a consistent response every single time, that honestly, that makes SecOps just that much happier. There's an anomaly. This is how we deal with the anomaly every single time, and we can prove it. And that's, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, operations needs to be consistent in how they operate. And, you know, as you say, you know, people are the biggest problem, unfortunately. You know, we can write all this down and make these wonderful administrative policies and, excuse me, process maps. But at the end of the day, people have to execute on those things. And the more we can kind of take the human element out, the more consistency we're going to have in our response, and the more we're going to be able to follow those requirements, those rules, you know, regulations, compliance requirements at all levels.
Yeah, Mark, and you mentioned, AIOps and, really kind of correlation and how that plays here. As organizations have continued to, let's say, collect IT operations tools, right? They might have a tool for log management. They might have a tool for application performance monitoring, a couple different tools for discovery, something to monitor their networking equipment, that's something different to monitor their cloud resources, and so on and so forth. If we want to continue to push towards being quick and agile and ensure, that MTTR is as low as possible within the organization and uptime is at an all-time high, a lot of that time and those cycles are just burned by sifting through the noise that comes from the myriad of tools we've collected over time, right? I like to joke that, look, 20 years ago, when I ran a data center, if something broke, we all got into a conference room. I looked at my console. Mark, you looked at your console. Mandy looked at another. We all looked at separate consoles, right? We all yelled at each other. We all blamed the network guys. And it's so funny that 20 years later, most organizations that we talk to, it's still that same approach, maybe minus the conference room, right? Those are at a premium anymore. Well, certainly now there's no conference room. Now it's Zoom or Skype for Business or Teams or whatever, right? But if we can have a mechanism that basically sits in between my collaboration tools, be it a Jira for dev, be it a Sharewell for IT service management, and my operations stack, and then that tool is essentially intelligently correlating these alerts down and reducing that raw noise by 60, 70, 80%, well, certainly I'm going to arrive at root cause quicker, and certainly I'm going to restore service significantly quicker because I can get to that root cause right away, right?
Good, great points.
Right.
What I'm hearing is sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I was just going to kind of pile on there, but the other, that whole root cause thing is we always, in service management, we talk about problem management, root cause analysis, and one of the biggest challenges we have in that space is that it takes time, right, to find root cause. If you can compress that time, then you're stopping the repeated offenses, right, the incidents that keep happening over and over and over again because we're just not quite sure why. And if you can do that kind of correlation using big data.
You're right. In fact, my decade spent in IT service management, most organizations we talked to said, look, we just don't have the resources to do problem management. We go from incident to major incident to change, right?
Yep.
And so quite often, I think historically, that's been one of the ITIL disciplines that's kind of been ignored just because of that overlay there. And that's really kind of an area where AIOps and intelligent correlation of alerts can really reduce just the amount of care and feeding and effort required to provide proper problem management within an organization.
Excellent. So just to recap, what I'm hearing is IT operations can help ensure adequate governance by identifying root cause quicker and obviously resolving these incidents quicker, streamlining and automating repeatable processes to help remove the possibility of human error, driving consistency in terms of deployment of services can certainly help improve compliance as well as optimize resources. But and then understanding dependencies. What are those infrastructure components that are supporting that application, or if that application is suffering, where is that infrastructure lying that supports it, so I can help troubleshoot. And then you also mentioned recordable sessions. I love that point that you mentioned, Jeff. And I was wondering if you might, if you wouldn't mind, jumping into the platform a little bit to really show the audience what we've been talking about a little bit as we get the conversation closer to IT operations and the specific features and capabilities that you guys have been mentioning.
Yeah, and let me just, as we transition over into showing a little bit of the platform, if we thought collaboration between IT ops and DevOps and service management was a challenge 6 months ago when we all worked in the same building, right? I mean, it's significantly more critical now as my DevOps folks are coding from home. My ITOps guys and gals aren't in the data center, right, where when something happens, it might now be load up in the car, drive to the office, suit up like I'm going to deliver brain surgery, get in the data center, and then take those actions. I mean, now more than ever, providing some glue that kind of holds these various IT disciplines or groups together, I think is extremely important as we continue to try to be the most agile we can. All right, so let me flip this over here and minimize this. And if I could get confirmation from you, David or Mandy, that you guys can see my screen.
We're seeing you.
All right, terrific. All right, well, in 30 minutes, folks, I obviously am not going to do a full platform deep dive. That's really kind of not the point of today's presentation, but we do want to pique your interest enough to maybe get a follow-up session scheduled with each of you. I want to approach this from a little bit of a different angle, right? So I actually have a resource that OpsRamp has discovered. This is a resource that happens to be in Amazon, in AWS. It's a resource that not only did we automatically discover, pull back inventory data on, pull back relationship data, but also that we're monitoring, right? And so when we kind of go back to my points earlier about, look, discovering, mapping, tying those to business services, monitoring, auto-healing, these are all things that I think play really nicely. And so let's kind of wrap a little bit more of a real-world story against that. Now, any of you in Ops or pretty much any other BU can already poke holes in my demo because, look, nobody would ever have an empty email inbox. But I'm going to have you play along with me anyways, right? So we can see here that OpsRamp was monitoring this resource. I stopped SQL on that box, and then bingo. OpsRamp has immediately notified us that there's an issue. So from the monitoring element, right? Now, look, as I mentioned earlier, we no longer live in a time where every server is named after a Star Wars character or a Lord of the Rings character, which means that this resource name doesn't mean a ton to me. But when we talk about delivering secure services and tying resources to services, yeah, this means a ton. In other words, look, I've got a resource out there in Amazon, SQL's running on it, it's no longer running on it, and it's impacting my accounting system or my accounting application. So that's what we talk about. Look, when I can tie some of that business context in, even something as rudimentary as escalations and notifications become that much more powerful because I know right away, I got to drop what I'm doing, the accounting application's having an issue. Now, what I want to do from here is actually drill into that alert for a second. I'm going to break this guy free and move him to a different window. Why don't we move him over here? There we go. And we'll tie him in right up here. All right, so I've drilled into this alert. I'm going to also preface this by saying everything that I'm doing on the platform today can be done without a VPN connection. Again, how powerful is that now that we're supporting our environments from home? And I'm no longer relying on, Comcast made a change and now I can't VPN in and I can't get into my infrastructure monitoring and management tools. And so now I've got to figure something else out, right? And so what we see here is that in the alert itself, I've got a lot of data available to me. I've got history, I've got incidents that have been logged against the resource. We can see down below here, impacted service groups. Now, the first thing that I want to do here is that, look, most organizations that I speak with say, look, we do not trust our monitoring tools to automatically open and route tickets in our ticketing system. And it comes back to something that Mark has brought up a couple times already. Because without correlation, if I lose a network switch, if I lose an ESX host, I'm at risk of getting 430 emails, text messages, voice messages, or tickets. So correlation's pretty darn key there. Now, in my environment, I don't have OpsRamp opening up tickets automatically because, you know what, I want to demonstrate something to you. We can see down below here, it's really kind of the first peek into machine learning and AI, which is this is not a rule that was written. This is, hey, OpsRamp, based on historical information that we've pulled back from ITSM and we've seen how technicians and whatnot have reacted, we think you should open up a ticket in the ticketing system, assign it to the database group, subcategory, SQL Server. We're going to automatically assign some knowledge articles. The machines have come up with all this. We didn't stick this into an escalation rule. So if I go ahead and I create an incident right from here and save this incident, I'll give this a second to refresh. Now I have that available right here. Now I will tell you that the one thing, when I talk to DevOps folks, when I talk to ITOps folks, you know, they're not a huge fan of IT service management. They're not a huge fan of alt-tabbing over to Sharewell or Remedy or ServiceNow to keep tabs of what they're doing when they've been tasked with restoring service as quickly as possible. So one of the things that we've done here in OpsRamp is basically have a proxy on through to all those different collaboration tools so that my folks in the NOC can say, hey folks on the service desk, we see this issue, we're working to get this resolved as quickly as possible. They can save that and we can go right back to the alert itself, do our troubleshooting and triage. If I need to add more color in here, I could certainly do that, right? Now, of course, at the API level, if I do a refresh, I've got access to ServiceNow in my environment, but this will work the same with Sharewell, Avanti, Salesforce Desk, Manage Engine, Jira, Serena, you name it, right? Essentially, we can see here that a ticket has been opened, a ticket's been updated, all of the fields in this ticket have been populated, it's been categorized, and here I have that collaborative nature over from the folks in the NOC. So what that, of course, means is that, you know, my folks on the service desk can stay in their tool of choice. My folks in the NOC can stay in OpsRamp, but they can still work together and collaborate from home or when we all return to our offices. The beauty of this is that we can hitch this up to multiple tools, right? I mean, some of you might be an organization that said, look, a year ago we acquired another company. They're using a different ITSM tool than we are. We're working on consolidating, but we're not there yet. You know what? OpsRamp can basically proxy that through to both at once. We could use certain elements to say, well, if it comes in from this location, open and route the ticket in this system versus another system. We could even say, hey, look, if it's the payroll system and if it's down, yeah, I want to open that up and I want to route that in my primary ITSM tool, my primary system of record. But if it's a synthetic transaction or a website that's just running slow, well, maybe instead of opening and routing that to the primary help desk, maybe instead OpsRamp automatically opens that up in Jira, routes it to the appropriate development team, spool us up a Slack channel for those guys and gals to work on it since they work differently than the IT service management folks do. So in that sense, we really kind of become the glue that holds the ops piece and the service management piece together. If I head back here for a second, whoop. My multi-screen here is behaving a little bit differently. There we go. Also from this alert that I had received, and again, if we can envision that I'm from home, I'm working at home, you know, I might say, let's run some scripts against this resource right here. And again, all this stuff's going to be captured from a, you know, from an audit standpoint. So I might say, look, I got this alert. It says SQL stopped running on this box. Before I do anything else, why don't I just validate that? And so here we can see, again, we're running a script, and I can verify that, yes, in fact, the SQL server is not running. Now, maybe also from here, what I want to do is kick off a remote control session. In fact, I did that right before. No VPN required. We record all these sessions, full role-based access control. Those playback sessions are searchable. You can scrub through them. There's a lot of things we can do here. But essentially, again, without any VPN, I'm now remoted into a resource. And that could be a Windows server in AWS. It could be a Linux server on-premise. It could be virtual, physical, doesn't matter to OpsRamp, right? So again, we're capturing all this data to kind of get back to David's point around governance. Now, I also might drill into the resource itself from here. And, you know, one of the things that we're doing here at OpsRamp is really trying to simplify the operational element. And we're doing that by providing a very consistent interface for everything that we're discovering and monitoring so that you can kind of back away from having just a fleet of subject matter experts. You got your storage guy, you got that all in the NOC. Let's move that out of the NOC so that really anybody that can understand some basic alerts can see here, look, we got the SQL server and it's not running on this box. Now, there's a couple of things I'll show you from here, right? I mean, we can see things like installed software. You wouldn't typically see that in a monitoring tool. You'd have to alt-tab over to a discovery tool to get that. OpsRamp's providing that here. You might have to alt-tab over to a patch management solution, but OpsRamp, as you can see, is also showing me missing patches that have been approved and installed. We can, of course, see all the metrics that we're pulling on this resource because we are at our core a monitoring platform. But, you know, I brought up the topic of auto healing. And if I step back for a second and we look at these monitors, I can see that OpsRamp has automatically applied 4 monitoring templates to this resource. I think that's key, the automated piece, right? We can actually manage these resources through something we call device management policies, where I would set up a policy that says, look, from this day on forward, anytime I see a new resource in Azure, a new resource in AWS, a new resource spooled up in vCenter, right? A new Windows server that happens to have SQL installed on it, do these things, right? Apply credentials, apply knowledge articles, apply monitoring templates, recurring maintenance jobs, like all the things that when we think about a playbook for provisioning resources, we can automate all of that. And the goal there is that next week, next month, next year, somebody stands up a new resource, I don't really care where or what type, OpsRamp will find that resource right away, and then we're going to start monitoring it so you don't end up with those blind spots. Because it's so quick and easy to provision these resources from the folks on the DevOps side, we know about them on the ITOps side. Now we can also talk about auto healing here, right? So one of these particular templates I can see is monitoring the state of the SQL Server service on this box. Now, if I fan this out for a second and scroll down to that particular monitor, and then we scroll out here to the right, I could also add an auto healing runbook automation. So I might say, look, on any critical alert that's come in from the Microsoft SQL Server service, you know what I want to do? I want to go ahead and I want to run a job that immediately restarts SQL on that box. And if that's successful and the resource goes green, OpsRamp can then update a ticket, close the ticket, mark it resolved, whatever you'd like us to do here. So, you know, Mark brought that up earlier, is look, if we can get things that are repeatable, right? Every time this outage occurs, somebody in IT operations runs a Python script and then does this and deletes this file and puts a new file here. If we can take all of that, pull that into your monitoring platform, trigger those actions upon breach of threshold, well, then a lot of those standard types of changes that would kind of break us out of the traditional Agile approach and moves us towards the older, slower waterfall type of approach. You know what? We've got that covered here for you. We can focus on the bigger picture. Now, if I step back for a second, we can see here that I'm looking at some dashboards. You know, obviously we live in a time, if I had 6 different monitoring tools, I'm probably not watching 6 different alert feeds, at least I hope I'm not. And so having dashboards like this are extremely powerful. There's tons of data that we can pull from all these resources and metrics that we can provide in these drag and drop, responsive design, role-based dashboards. One of the things that we do see with OpsRamp that we don't typically see with traditional IT operations platforms are organizations giving access to the various BUs into the platform. I don't see that with a SolarWinds or Nagios or ScienceLogic, right? But we do see that here because this might be my view as someone who owns the accounting system. I want to look at things like change detection on CPU and outages and synthetic response times and latency and alert trends all in this one place, right? So I can keep better tabs on this. Now, if I scroll in here, we can see one of the other things we mentioned is how can we then tie these resources to the various business services? You know, I can see that the accounting application is down. Yes, we already know that. And if I click in here, what I'm presented with is an operational service map. What you're looking at here are essentially buckets of resources. These buckets have rules against them that define 2 things. The first is they can define how resources automatically assign themselves, right? So if I stand up a new resource in vCenter or UCS, I can actually have that auto-assign to the buckets. The second thing that we're pulling here is the rules around availability. So like you can see I've got load balancers down here. If there were 2 load balancers in there, OpsRamp understands up, down, and degraded. Right? So if I lose one load balancer, theoretically the second one's going to pick up where the first left off. That's key for escalation because that means we won't wake anybody up in the middle of the night because we say, look, the other one's running. Yes, the service is degraded, but we can tackle that in the morning. But if we lose both of them, you bet that things are going to go red, and then we can start firing off those escalations. I've drilled down here in the switches for a second. Yes, sir.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt you. Love what you're showing us. I was wondering, your monitor went a little blurry a little bit. I was wondering if you can jump out of screen share mode and then back in, see if that might help.
I can certainly try that.
Maybe a connection issue.
I've got gigabits here. I would think it wouldn't be that, but let's try it anyways. Add a screen share. You just thinking about it. All right, I'm back.
All right, sorry. Let's run with it.
Am I still a little on the blurry side?
It's a little bit, but we
right.
get the idea.
Okay, great. Well, so this would be really that element of tying resources to business services, so I can get things like service availability, and I can also get those alerts and escalations around the services themselves. If I drill into, in this case, let's say a network switch, we also talked about, look, not only discovering these resources, right? I've drilled into a couple different types of technologies now. And in this case, look, on this switch, we're getting a ton of information, right? The metrics and the monitoring templates. We could SSH into this switch just like we could have done the same in a Linux resource or Windows resource. We've discovered all the interfaces on this switch and are monitoring those interfaces for all the metrics. But we can see in the top corner, I've got a little triangle here. And if I drill into that, what we're going to see is that OpsRamp has also automatically determined the relationships that exist in relation to this switch. So I can see all the downstream, and I'll make this a little bigger if I'm blurry, all the downstream resources from this switch, right? And I can see that I've got an ESX host down here. So if I actually go a little bit deeper, and we'll give this a couple seconds to paint the screen, that ESX host has a whole heck of a lot of guest machines on it, right? Traditionally, this is a great picture of why organizations shy away from having monitoring tools opening tickets in their ticketing system. Because if I lose the interface on that switch or that switch altogether, you can see how many tickets I'm going to get, right? Now, understanding these relationships is key for security and SecOps. It's key for understanding impact for our folks on the service desk. These maps can be automatically exported into various CMDBs and maintained that way. But we actually have a very selfish reason that we're drawing these different maps, and that's so that we can pump that relationship data into our machine learning to provide one of three methods of correlation. So we can do correlation at the topology level, right? If I lose a switch and everything downstream from that switch goes down or is no longer visible to my monitoring tools, well, OpsRamp would correlate that all up into one single event, open one ticket, send one email, one text message, right? So again, kind of cutting through that noise to say, uh-oh, I know exactly the root cause. The reason those things downstream aren't accessible is because we can see here that switch port is down. Now, that's the first method. We can also do algorithm or text-based correlation where the machines are looking for similarity in alerts, even if we don't raise the alert, right? Obviously, we have our own native monitoring capabilities. But if you're using, Splunk and a New Relic and OpsRamp and you've got some pockets of SolarWinds still out there, obviously each of those things are going to raise slightly different alerts if they're all looking at the same resource. OpsRamp can cut through that noise as well by leveraging algorithms to do so. We also are doing correlation based on learned sequences. So, a server runs out of disk space and then 30 seconds later, Tomcat stops responding and then Splunk complains and then AppD and then we breach on another metric. You're not going to get all those separate alerts. OpsRamp's going to correlate that all down into a single event for which we can then take that action. You can see here, this was a network switch that I drilled into, but we can map out relationships between vCenter resources. Here we're looking at Kubernetes and the relationships from a container standpoint. Here I've actually got AWS mapped out with all my relationships. Right? We're starting to dip our toes in application topology mapping. So all these different consumers of all these different relationships that we've got, right, can really benefit from this for impact analysis, but also for the correlation and the reduction in the noise itself. Now, if I can just kind of wrap up, I want to make sure that we leave a little bit of time for Q&A, right? If I pull up this remote session one more time, let's just go ahead and exit this. And if we drill back into that resource one more time. All right. So from here, I've got a few things that I can look at, right? I can see, for example, script activity. What have technicians been doing here, right? I can also see recordings. And so here we can see today, I actually logged in, fired off a remote shell. I was looking into a Microsoft SQL issue. And then again, I can search for commands or things across all of these remote sessions. I could also go ahead and play back any of these sessions. So again, for those of you, this is killer for third-party contractors. Look, I got to give this contractor 30 minutes of access to a single resource, and it's so hard to get VPN access. With OpsRamp, we don't have to do that. We can give that person access to that resource. They can do what they need to do. We're going to record everything along the way. This is also super powerful for any of you out there who are managed service providers. We've got quite a few large MSPs that leverage this, and their customers and tenants are asking for this audit trail or audit history. So that plays extremely nicely into, that governance conversation as well. Hopefully that was a sufficient teaser, right? I mean, of course, with any larger platform with many different disciplines, we really only wanted to speak to kind of the topic today. Just know that on that same single IT operations SaaS-based platform, we're providing the unified discovery of hybrid resources. We are mapping the technology relationships between those resources. We're monitoring those resources, and actually we're bringing some machine learning to the monitoring elements. We're ingesting alerts from other sources. We're doing normalization, deduplication. We're correlating all of those alerts regardless of source. We're leveraging machine learning to bring auto alert suppression to the table. So if you've got the backup jobs every Sunday night that start waking people up when they trip over a threshold, we're going to learn that that's normal behavior and suppress those types of alerts. We've got the run books and the patch management and the remote capabilities in the platform, right? The run book for remediation. And then as you saw in the demo earlier, the ability to open and escalate these issues to multiple systems at once, depending upon the type. So it really does empower IT operations to support DevOps, to support IT service management, cloud ops, but ultimately what? To support your user community and your customers.
Jeff, I couldn't say any better myself. Thank you for that summary and for the demonstration. I love being able to show off the platform. We do have a couple questions if we have time to get to them in this little amount of time. But one question about scalability of the OpsRamp platform. Now, delivered via SaaS, I mentioned earlier, but if you can talk to us a little bit about what size or types of organizations are ideal to adopt the OpsRamp platform.
That's the beauty of SaaS, right? Is that the thinking no longer takes place on premise in literally racks of servers, right? The managing and maintaining of the infrastructure, that onus is no longer you as an organization. OpsRamp actually is an extremely large back-end platform. We have points of delivery or pods. I think there's 16 of them completely around the world. Of course, there is a little bit of an on-prem element. Most organizations aren't going to open the floodgates so all their resources can talk directly to the OpsRamp cloud. So there is a concept of a gateway appliance that sits kind of between the two, opens up that TLS 1.2 pipe so that this information is transmitted in an encrypted fashion. But, we've got customers that have 10,000, 500, 100,000 resources on the platform without any scalability issues or performance issues because we've built that back-end infrastructure so robustly with full high availability and whatnot. In fact, if we can name drop a little bit, if any of you are familiar with HPE's GreenLake initiative, right? It's a solution around flexible and easily consumable cloud storage, as well as a few other elements of that. OpsRamp is the platform that's supporting the GreenLake solution, and I believe they are in the middle onboarding up to 3 million resources into the platform. So we're not seeing, and they're not seeing, any sort of performance degradation as a result.
It's a really good point in terms of, I mean, no matter if you're a medium-sized company or a large-sized company, your infrastructure is complex. You know, they can always become more simplified and streamlined, automated, and more of a governed, or improve the governance of that environment. We had a question about the monitoring templates and you know, deploying prefabbed monitoring templates versus customizing those monitoring templates. Can you talk to us a little bit about the customizability of that?
Yeah, of course. Completely extensible from a monitors, metrics, and template standpoint. Look, nobody's got the appetite for an 18-month huge legacy on-prem IT operations deployment anymore, right? Those days have come and gone. And obviously SaaS tremendously shortens that time to value. But beyond that, you know, the platform comes with almost 1,200 out-of-the-box monitoring templates. If you've got MIBs you need to import, right, that maybe aren't on the platform, we provide that service for you in a white glove manner, so you don't have to. You can create your own custom metrics. You can create your own custom monitors. You can modify and customize monitoring templates and thresholds. All that's available, but really we wanted to provide that big, huge pool of out-of-the-box, because for most organizations, they're going to say, hey, look, the out-of-the-box Nutanix templates and the out-of-the-box vCenter templates are just fine for us. We just want to get these things up and running as quickly as possible. So when you pair that flexibility with the ability to deliver those via policy as opposed to kind of more of the ad hoc one-off approach, it really does come together for a rapid deployment of the platform.
Great, thank you for that. I want to give you guys, Mark and Jeff, give you guys an opportunity for any closing remarks, if you have any.
You want to start us, Mark? I think everybody's probably sick of hearing my voice by now.
Oh, never. No, you know, I think as I kind of opened with this, you know, the OpsRamp platform is something that we as a service management consulting firm are very excited about. You know, we go out on consulting gigs, and we're talking to these organizations that are struggling with the very things that an OpsRamp type platform addresses, and you know, you covered those, I think, wonderfully in the demo. But it's really, you know, from our perspective, again, we always kind of try to bring it back to people and processes, right? The technology is important; it enables so many things. But the end of the day, you know, our processes and how we work, and this goes back to that governance question, and you know, the same thing with, you know, how we enable DevOps organizations. This kind of technology really does help us, you know, help us to really realize the potential of those concepts and those methodologies.
Yeah, and in closing, really, I just want to add, look, I mean, if you kind of peel back to our mission here at OpsRamp is, you know, we're driving to empower modern digital operations teams to be the first to know, because that's so critical when we talk about DevOps, when we talk about Agile. We want to enable your organizations to take action faster with context and insight that they never had before, right? And ultimately, we've done this in the service management side. We want to help you transition to running IT operations and DevOps as a service back to your end user community and to your customers. So thank you very much for your time today, everybody.